The morning it all started, I was sipping coffee on my porch while my German shepherd, Duke, lay at my feet, half asleep and twitching in a dream. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when I heard the high heels. Click, click, click. That unmistakable stomp of trouble in a pantsuit. Mr. O'Callahan, came the shrill voice of Tabitha Elridge, the HOA vice president and self-appointed queen of our neighborhood. 50-something, always clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon and blessed with the personality of a traffic citation. I stood up and gave a polite nod. Morning, Tabitha. Something I can help you with. She stopped at the edge of my walkway like Duke had drawn a chalk line she didn't dare cross. Yes, actually, I'm here regarding several complaints about your dog. Duke raised his head and wagged his tail, the absolute menace that he was. Complaints? I asked, heart already picking up speed. She squinted at her clipboard like she was reading off a war crimes list. Aggressive barking, intimidating behavior. And yesterday, someone claims he lunged at a child passing by your fence. I stared at her. You're kidding. He's never even snarled at a squirrel. I'm afraid the HOA takes these matters very seriously, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. If your dog's behavior continues to pose a danger, we may have to involve animal control. You could be fined or worse, face removal orders. I felt my jaw clench. Tabitha, Duke's never been aggressive. He's trained, vaccinated, chipped, and has never left my yard without a leash. If someone's making stuff up, I want names. I'm not at liberty to give names, she replied, already turning on her heel. But I would recommend you keep him indoors until further notice, for everyone's safety. She walked off like she'd just handed down a royal decree. I looked down at Duke. Well, buddy, guess we're public enemy number one. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head. I knew Duke wasn't the problem. Someone was. So I stayed up and installed a set of motion-activated cameras around the front and side of my property. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing unusual, just Duke sunbathing behind the fence and a few neighbors walking by without even looking over. Then, on the third day, I caught her, Tabitha. Standing across the street with a little yappy dog in her arms looked like a Pomeranian with a bad haircut. She waited until a boy on a bike passed by. Then she shouted, "Watch out, that dog's dangerous," and pointed at my yard. The kid barely glanced over. Duke didn't even move. But Tabitha snapped a photo anyway, then jotted something down on her clipboard. I stared at the footage in disbelief. She was staging it, creating fake incidents just to build a case. I burned that video onto a flash drive and printed screenshots. I wasn't just going to defend my dog, I was going to bury her in her own lies. I drove down to City Hall that morning with the flash drive in my front shirt pocket and a folder of printed screenshots under my arm. My destination wasn't the police station, at least not yet. First, I had a better idea. The Municipal Code Enforcement Office sat on the second floor above the public library. I'd been there once before, years ago, back when the HOA tried to cite me for non-conforming mailbox paint. The clerk behind the desk looked up as I stepped in. "Morning," I said, approaching her. "I need to file a complaint regarding falsified reports within my HOA. It involves fabricated accusations and possibly harassment." She raised an eyebrow. "Got documentation?" I tapped the folder. Video, images, timestamps. All clearly showing the HOA vice president staging incidents to justify action against me. I'm requesting an investigation into abuse of authority under municipal oversight regulations. She nodded slowly, reaching out for the folder. "You're not the first one with issues from that neighborhood, I'll tell you that. We've had noise with that HOA before." She slid the folder open and whistled under her breath. "You mind if I make copies? Be my guest," I said, taking a seat. 2 hours later, a code enforcement investigator named Julian Alvarez called me into a small conference room. He was mid-30s, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His eyes skimmed the screenshots with the speed of someone used to paperwork that smelled like trouble. "Walk me through this," he said. I did, starting with the surprise visit, the vague accusations, and the staged photos. He didn't interrupt once, just nodded occasionally, then plugged in my flash drive. When the footage played, his brows lifted. "That's her yelling at a kid who clearly isn't reacting," he said. "And your dog doesn't even get up. Exactly, I said. She's manufacturing a case. I want this documented officially before she tries escalating it. She's referencing leash laws and animal control jurisdiction in her letters. Haven't received anything formal, just doorstep threats and clipboard nonsense. Alvarez tapped his pen. We've got a few ways to approach this. If she's filing false reports on behalf of the HOA, that's misrepresentation. If she's using HOA letterhead to do it, that's unauthorized use of legal documents. And if she's targeting you to push you into compliance based on fictional behavior, that could hit harassment under local statute 31-12. I leaned back, tension finally easing from my shoulders. I knew it had to be illegal at some level. I'll file a complaint with the city attorney, Alvarez said. Don't worry, and if she tries anything else, call me directly. Meanwhile, I'd suggest notifying your neighbors. If she's doing this to you, she's probably done it before. That gave me an idea. By that afternoon, I'd printed out a stack of flyers. At the top, bold letters. Is the HOA targeting you with false claims? You're not alone. Beneath that, I included a cropped screenshot of Tabitha snapping a photo across the street without naming her directly and an email address I set up for responses. I dropped off copies at every doorstep on my street and a few blocks over. Then I waited. 36 hours later, I had 18 emails. 8 of them described suspicious citations, overgrown hedges that were trimmed, trash cans left out that hadn't been, even one about a porch light that apparently violated aesthetic codes during Christmas. But one email stood out. It came from a woman named Rebecca Tran, who lived on the corner across from the park. Her message was short. Your flyer explains a lot. Tabitha fined me last year for aggressive dog behavior after my Labrador barked once through the window. I fought it, but she said she had authority to escalate it to animal control. She mentioned she had contacts. I didn't push back. I was afraid. I responded immediately, asking if she'd be willing to speak about it. An hour later, we met at the cafe by the gas station. Rebecca was maybe in her late 40s, quiet but steady. She had a folder of her own filled with correspondence from the HOA. Most of it was vague, but one letter stood out. It was a final warning, typed on HOA letterhead, with no signature, just the printed name, Vice President Tabitha Elridge. She told me if I didn't pay the fine, she'd take it to the board and have my pet privileges revoked, Rebecca said. I didn't even know that was a thing. It's not, I said. There's nothing in the bylaws about that. I checked. Rebecca exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. You think she's making these rules up as she goes? I don't just think it. I can prove it. Over the next week, I gathered more evidence. Neighbors forwarded me letters. I combed through the HOA bylaws and compared them to the violations people had been cited for. Not a single one matched. Tabitha had been inventing policies wholesale and enforcing them under the guise of HOA authority. I compiled it all into a report and submitted it to Julian Alvarez. But by then, things had already begun to unravel. Tabitha must have gotten wind of the flyers, because one morning I found a notice taped to my door. It was a formal HOA violation again, unsigned, claiming I had distributed defamatory content against the association, and that I was inciting unrest among residents. It ended with a demand. Cease and desist all unauthorized neighborhood correspondence or face legal consequences. I called Julian. She's retaliating, I told him, and she's escalating. Good, he said calmly. Let her, that's more documentation for us, but you might want to stop by the precinct. There's someone who wants to talk to you. That afternoon, I met with Officer Marquez, a community liaison who worked with local fraud cases. Julian had briefed her already. She wasn't smiling when I walked in. We've flagged your HOA before, she said. Mostly minor nonsense, but this is different. You've got fabricated policies, false documentation, and what looks like personal retaliation against multiple residents. If she's using HOA authority to issue fines and threats without board approval, that could qualify as impersonation of a legal official. Is that prosecutable? I asked. She nodded. We'll need board meeting minutes, financial records, and proof of unilateral actions. If she's collecting fines personally or bypassing normal channels, we're looking at fraud at minimum. I can get the minutes, I said. I have a friend on the board. You do that, she said, and keep your phone close. If she tries anything else, report it immediately. I left the station with a sense of momentum I hadn't felt since this whole thing began. Tabitha thought she could bully people into silence with phony authority and scare tactics, but she hadn't counted on someone documenting every move. That night, I got a call from Rebecca. Her voice was nervous, excited. "You're going to want to see this," she said. "I just got an email. It's a forwarded message." Tabitha sent it to another board member by mistake. She meant to send it to someone else. She's bragging about how she's cleaning up the neighborhood by getting rid of the problem pet owners. She even says she's keeping a list. My stomach turned. "Send it to me," I said. "We're taking this to the board." I met Alan Whitaker, the board treasurer, at his garage late that evening. He was a wiry guy with a permanent oil stain on his shirt pocket and the kind of cautious paranoia that only came from 4 decades of living 2 doors down from Tabitha. When I told him what I needed, he didn't hesitate. He reached behind a filing cabinet, pulled out a yellow envelope, and handed it to me like he was passing classified files. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered, glancing toward the streetlight filtering through the garage windows. "She stopped letting me see the meeting notes 2 months ago. Said she'd streamline communications herself." "She's not allowed to do that," I said. "No kidding," Alan replied. "But nobody wants to go toe-to-toe with her. You're the first one who's actually punched back." I opened the envelope once I was home. Inside were the last 4 months of board meeting minutes handwritten, not typed. Most of them were short, bare-bones summaries, but what caught my eye was the last page. It had red pen scribbles and a note in the margin that read, "Discuss enforcement of behavioral pet ordinances." There was no vote recorded, no signatures, just a final line. "We'll proceed with pilot enforcement plan." T.E. I took a picture of that note and added it to the growing folder of evidence. Then I forwarded the entire collection, Rebecca's email, Whitaker's documents, and the HOA's fake citations to Officer Marquez. Less than 48 hours later, I got a call. "This just turned criminal," she said. "We've confirmed that Tabitha submitted multiple incident reports under the HOA's name, none of which were approved by the board. She's also been cashing fine payments into a personal account." I nearly dropped the phone. "She's what?" "She opened a separate account last year under a name almost identical to the HOA's, just with one word flipped. She's been processing checks through it. We're coordinating with the district attorney's office now. This may qualify as wire fraud, impersonation of a legal entity, and misappropriation of association funds." I didn't respond immediately. I was still stuck on the image of her pocketing money from people she'd bullied into believing they'd broken laws that didn't exist. "We'll need you and a couple of the residents she targeted to come in and file sworn statements," Marquez added. "The more we have, the stronger our case." Next afternoon, I met Rebecca and 2 other neighbors, Tom and Asha, outside the police department. Tom was a retired firefighter, built like a brick wall and just as expressive. Asha worked night shifts at the hospital and had the exhausted, razor-sharp focus of someone used to triage chaos. Inside, the detective walked us through the process calmly. We each gave our statements. A forensic accountant was already reviewing transactions linked to the fake HOA account. Asha brought in her copies of payment receipts, 3 separate fines for vague violations like excessive pet noise and failure to restrain animal activity. One of them had a note at the bottom, "Payable to Elridge Community Oversight." "That's not even a real committee," the detective said, shaking his head. "She made up a department." "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "We've got enough to move forward with charges," he said. "We're issuing a subpoena for all HOA financial records. Once we confirm she funneled funds into a fake entity, the district attorney will proceed. She'll likely be arrested." As we walked out of the station, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Inside, 2 plainclothes officers were watching the entrance. They weren't trying to be subtle. That night, I received an email from the HOA's official account. Not from Tabitha, from the HOA president, Douglas Price, who had remained curiously silent throughout all this. His message was clipped and formal, asking if I'd be willing to meet the board at an emergency session the following evening to discuss recent concerns regarding HOA operations. When I arrived at the community center, the parking lot was already packed. Word had traveled fast. Inside, folding chairs were set up in rows and the low buzz of murmured conversations filled the air. I spotted Douglas at the front, looking more tired than authoritative. Tabitha stood next to him, arms crossed, her usual clipboard nowhere in sight. Douglas cleared his throat. "We've called this meeting to address a growing number of complaints regarding recent enforcement actions taken under the HOA's name," he said. "Several residents have come forward with concerns about improper fines and fabricated violations." Tabitha's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. I stood when Douglas opened the floor. "I have video evidence of your vice president staging incidents to justify citations," I said, holding up a flash drive. "I also have screenshots of her photographing children without consent, handwritten meeting notes showing unauthorized decisions, financial records showing misappropriated funds, and testimony from multiple residents who were fined for offenses that don't exist in the bylaws." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Douglas looked at Tabitha. "Is this true?" she exhaled sharply. "I took proactive measures. We needed order and the board was dragging its feet. I used discretion." "You used personal bank accounts," I said, "and you forged HOA documents. You've been running a fake enforcement racket." Tabitha didn't deny it. "Security footage, emails, payment records, they all point to you," I continued, "and the police have everything." That's when the doors opened. 2 officers stepped in, calm, professional. One of them held up a warrant. The room went dead silent. "Tabitha Elridge," the officer said, "you're under arrest for fraud, misappropriation of funds, and impersonation of a legal entity. Please stand." She froze for half a second, then turned to Douglas. "This is outrageous." "You're letting them do this to me. You did this to yourself," he said quietly. The officers cuffed her. She didn't resist, but her face was a storm of disbelief and rage. As they walked her past me, she stared like I'd betrayed some unspoken pact. Outside, the crowd began to murmur louder. People were already texting, calling neighbors, snapping photos. The queen of the clipboard had fallen. With Tabitha gone, the board voted to suspend all enforcement actions and launch a full audit of the HOA's records. Alan Whitaker agreed to serve as interim vice president. They brought in a third-party accountant to review every financial transaction from the past 2 years. But the aftermath wasn't just about money. The board repealed every one of Tabitha's fines. They refunded payments. And more importantly, they rewrote the bylaws to require that all violation notices be voted on by a quorum and signed by no fewer than 2 board members. No more solo crusades. At the next HOA meeting, Rebecca stood behind the podium and proposed a motion to create a resident oversight committee. Not a fake one, like Tabitha's, an actual elected group of homeowners who'd review all future enforcement actions before they were finalized. The motion passed unanimously. As for Duke, he got a new tag for his collar. It read, "Neighborhood Watch." And every morning, without fail, he sprawled across the lawn like he owned the block, no clipboard in sight. The week after Tabitha's arrest was a whirlwind of paperwork, board meetings, and quiet door-to-door conversations that lasted well past sunset. No one in the neighborhood had ever seen the HOA shaken from the inside like this. But once the grip broke, people weren't just eager to talk, they were demanding answers. Douglas, the HOA president, called an open forum at the community center that Friday. No RSVP, no agenda. Just a promise, full transparency. He stood behind a folding table with 3 other board members beside him, none of whom looked particularly thrilled to be there. The room filled quickly. Folding chairs scraped tile as neighbors packed in, some standing along the sides. Duke lay quietly at my feet, his presence more symbolic than anything. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply watched. Douglas raised his hand to quiet the room. "We've initiated a forensic review of all actions taken under the HOA's authority over the past 18 months. The findings so far are troubling." His voice cracked just slightly, but he pressed on. Tabitha Elridge acted without board approval on numerous occasions. She created fake citation protocols, collected unauthorized payments, and fabricated violations. Worse, she submitted documentation to the county under forged board signatures to give herself legitimacy. A man in the back stood up. "Are those documents still active? Can they come after us later?" Douglas shook his head. "We've already worked with the county clerk's office to rescind them. They no longer hold any legal weight." A woman near the front raised her voice. "What about the money she collected?" That's when Alan stepped forward, holding a paper in one hand. An independent auditor traced over $30,000 in personal checks and money orders deposited into a private account under a name that closely resembled our HOA's. That account was not listed in any of our official financials. All funds were withdrawn in multiple cash transactions. "The bank has frozen the account, but most of the money is gone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone asked, "Will she be charged for that?" Douglas nodded. "The district attorney has filed multiple felony charges, including wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. A grand jury has been convened. The state is involved now." I stood up. "Has anyone looked into whether she used that money to influence vendors or pay off anyone else? There were contracts that never made sense, like the landscaping crew that never showed up, or the security patrol that no one ever saw." Douglas didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Alan cleared his throat. "We're investigating those contracts. Some vendors don't exist in the county registry. Others were subcontracted out with no traceable paper trail. We believe she may have funneled HOA funds into shell companies." A hush fell over the room. For the first time, it wasn't just about citations or aggressive letters. This was organized theft, and she'd nearly gotten away with it. Later that evening, I got a call from Officer Marquez. Her tone was calm but urgent. "She's refusing a plea deal," she said. "Her attorney's pushing for trial, but with the evidence we've got, the DA's confident. The judge just approved search warrants for her storage unit and 2 other properties tied to her name. If there's more, we'll find it." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window as the wind stirred the trees in the backyard. "Is there any chance she'll try to blame the board?" "She's trying," Marquez said. "Claims they were all complicit, but the paper trail only ties back to her. She forged signatures, used private email servers, and conducted every transaction through accounts she controlled. It's airtight." The trial didn't take long to schedule. With the volume of evidence and the urgency of public trust, the court pushed it forward. By the time the date rolled around, the story had already made local headlines. "Neighborhood Queenpin indicted for HOA fraud." It wasn't just a scandal, it was a case study in unchecked power gone toxic. I sat behind the prosecution bench during opening statements, next to Rebecca and Tom. Asha couldn't make it, her hospital shift overlapped, but she'd submitted her written testimony. The prosecution laid out the case with precision. They showed screenshots of falsified notices, copies of checks made out to fake departments, and video of Tabitha staging incidents. They even brought in a handwriting analyst, who confirmed that multiple board signatures on enforcement letters were forged by the same hand hers. The defense didn't have much to stand on. They argued that Tabitha had been overzealous and committed only administrative oversteps. But the jury wasn't buying it. By the 4th day, the evidence from her storage unit sealed the deal. Investigators found a locked cabinet filled with HOA documents marked unfiled, including dozens of fabricated violation letters, blank checks, and a ledger where she tracked how much compliance revenue she'd collected from each household. She even had a star system, 1 to 5 stars next to certain names. Mine had 5. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison, with no chance of parole for at least 5. She was also ordered to pay restitution, though most of the stolen money was unrecoverable. Her assets, including her house, were seized. The proceeds would go toward reimbursing affected residents. The fallout moved quickly. Vendors who'd been named in her fake contracts were investigated. 2 of them turned out to be real businesses that had been misled into issuing blank invoices. They cooperated fully. One even offered to provide free services to the neighborhood for a year as a gesture of goodwill. The HOA held a new election this time with open ballots, a public forum, and a mandatory audit clause added to the bylaws. Alan was voted in as president. Rebecca became secretary. I declined an official title, but they created a new advisory role for me, community legal liaison. Mostly symbolic, but it meant I'd be looped into every policy discussion from now on. We also passed a new rule. No board member could serve more than 2 consecutive terms. No exceptions. But perhaps the biggest change wasn't in the paperwork, it was in the people. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves started talking. We organized a weekend cleanup, not because we were fined into doing it, but because we wanted to. Someone built a little free library near the park. A group of teens painted a mural on the old utility wall with the board's blessing. It read, "Respect, not control," and Duke, he had his own moment of vindication. At the first summer block party, someone presented him with a collar medallion shaped like a little gavel. It read, "Honorary Defender of the Neighborhood." He didn't know what it meant, of course. But when the kids took turns petting him and slipping him bits of grilled chicken, I figured he understood enough. As I stood beside the grill that evening, drink in hand, I noticed Douglas approach. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. No tie, no clipboard, just a plate of ribs and a tired smile. "I owe you," he said, nodding toward me. "You didn't just stop her, you held all of us accountable. We let it go on too long." I nodded. It wasn't just her. She exploited a system that let her hide behind fake authority. Now that system's been ripped wide open. He raised his cup. "To watchdogs, the ones with fur and the ones with bite," I clinked mine against his. "We didn't need a verdict to teach us the lesson, but we got one anyway." And from that day forward, the only thing the HOA enforced consistently was fair process. No more fake violations. No more threats on doorsteps, just neighbors working together. The way it should have been all along.